Today we're going to go over Hannah Arendt's concept of labor, which she makes in her book, The Human Condition. She says labor is one of the three conditions of the human condition, and she describes it as the life process. This video is going to be slightly different than the other videos that I've made before. I've gathered a series of quotes that describe Hannah Arendt's concept of labor, and I think it's better as she will tell it than I will. So I will go through the quotes and try to explain them as we go through them. Now, first, the concept of labor itself comes from ancient Greece, and in ancient Greek life, labor or any kind of necessity that you were put on was seen as an enslavement. Again, any necessity like feeding yourself or clothing yourself or having a house to keep your house in order were all things that were necessary, and in that way, since they were necessary, they were not good. The ancient Greeks might characterize animals as doing necessary things, and to be human, it was to be higher than animals, and thus to be a human that only does necessary things, you were seen basically as an animal. Hannah Arendt says, to labor meant to be enslaved by necessity, and this enslavement was inherent in the conditions of human life. Labor was so looked down upon that it was meant to be kept in the private realm. Now, in ancient Greece, you had the private kind of household where you'd keep to your things, and the polis was the public, and you would have conversations with people. There were distinct places, and labor was meant specifically for the private. It was not to be seen in public. Hannah Arendt says, the activity of labor does not need the presence of others, though a being laboring is in complete solitude would not be a human, but an animal laborans in the world's most literal significance. Now, what labor does when we feed ourselves, when we tend the garden, when we are or cleaning the house, there's no product that results from it. It's merely a sustaining of life itself. And in this sense, Hannah Arendt says labor is a reproductive force. She says, unlike the productivity of work, which adds new objects to the human artifice, the productivity of labor power produces objects only incidentally and is primarily concerned with the means of its own reproduction. Since its power is not exhausted when its own reproduction has been secured, it can be used for the reproduction of more than one life process, but it never produces anything but life. So let's just say I'm going to bake, 20 muffins today, and it's a large labor process. However, I have only one body to feed, and so that surplus is going to go bad. It's not going to leave anything in the world. Even if I put more labor, if I make 50 muffins, it's not going to make a difference. Now, Hannah Arendt believed that there was a moment in time when labor, as this private activity that was looked down upon in ancient Greece, turned into one of the highest activities of human life. And she says this happened when Locke basically associated labor with property. She says, the sudden spectacular rise of labor from the lowest, most despised position to the highest rank as the most esteemed of all human activities began when Locke discovered that labor is the source of all property. It followed its course when Adam Smith asserted that labor was the source of all wealth and found its climax in Marx's system of labor, where labor became the source of all productivity and the expression of the very humanity of man. Thus, since labor was seen as this esteemed activity where you could gather property and you can build yourself as a person, it no longer needed to be in the private household. It didn't need to be hidden away from public life. And Arendt believes that this no longer needing to be hidden resulted in what she calls the social realm. She says, the social realm where the life process has established its own public domain has let loose an unnatural growth, so to speak, of the natural. And it is against this growth, not merely against society, but against a constantly growing social realm that the private and intimate, on the one hand, and the political, in the narrow sense of the word, on the other, have proved incapable of defending themselves. So as labor, this once private activity, became more and more public, people talked about it, it became more of a natural thing, private life itself started to decline. That place that you could go to and be with yourself and not with others was no longer a significant part of life. You can see this in wellness trends. People advertising certain drugs to make you feel happy or to do certain activities that will make you healthy. These things that was once part of the labor process and hidden away in ancient Greek are now becoming this huge kind of social realm. You can think of, I want to live my life kind of through my own necessities the way I want to live them, but there's always this voice on the external, in the social realm, that says you ought to kind of live this way. And this is kind of a new phenomenon, Arendt believes. Once labor became a more than necessary activity, an important activity of human life in the public realm. And even more so, labor became synonymous almost with productivity, that your well-being as a human, your ability to produce, was what defined who you were. She says, what we described as the unnatural growth of natural is usually considered to be the constantly accelerated increase in the productivity of labor. The greatest single factor in this constant increase since its inception has been the organization of laboring, visibly in the so-called division of labor, which preceded the Industrial Revolution. So again, labor was connected with property, which was connected with wealth, and the kind of unlimited accumulation of wealth became kind of the desire of human life. And it was only through the laboring process of how productive you were that you could gain more and more and more. This led to labor as a force of consumption, where Arendt says, whatever labor produces is meant to be fed into the human life process almost immediately. And this consumption, regenerating the life process, produces, or rather reproduces, new labor power needed for the further sustenance of the body. You can see this in certain jobs where you automate things. You do labor so you have to do less labor later. It's really efficiency and productivity that drives the labor process. And Arendt thinks this is a fully modern phenomenon. She says the Industrial Revolution has replaced all workmanship with labor, and the result has been that all the things of the modern world have become labor products whose natural fate is to be consumed instead of work products, which are to be used in the world. So again, this labor, this productivity is not meant to produce anything per se, to put it in the world as something that should be immortal or kind of stand on its own, but it's only meant to be used to feed back into the labor process. You can see this today with buying stuff at big stores or Amazon. You buy a table, and the table is not expensive. It works. It works for your lifestyle, which is a laborious lifestyle. And once you're done with it, you throw it away. It's consumed. It's not meant to be in the world long term. And finally, in the chapter, Hannah Arendt links labor with actually unhappiness in society. She says, the universal demand for happiness and the widespread unhappiness in our society, and these are but two sides of the same coin, are among the most persuasive signs that we have begun to live in a labor society which lacks enough laboring to keep it contented. So if we become more and more productive at our laboring, at being able to do things, we are able to order the world in a certain way that is almost perfect for what we want. But once we get there, laboring itself, the capacity to labor even more, declines and declines and declines. And since we've kind of identified ourselves as laborers, where we gain our happiness through our own productivity and our own work, once we get to a state where productivity doesn't have the value it once had, we start to see a widespread of unhappiness. This might be why we come up with the terms like having a good busy. You're busy, but it's a good busy. It sustains the life process, the laboring way of life in the modern world, such that it makes you happy about your own productivity. But according to Arendt, that happy busy is kind of a symptom of this larger process of the kind of rise of labor as human identity. So there's a lot there. Hannah Arendt has a whole chapter on labor, so I've only touched the surface here, but I think I touched on the main topics, or the main, for me, the most important things that I got out of the chapter. I'll probably do the same thing for work and the action, the other two conditions that Hannah Arendt designates as part of the Vita Activa, and we'll see where we're going from there.